I, as a parent, became very passionate about the science of reading. My daughter was in kindergarten during the height of the pandemic, and I was one of those parents that was on Zoom watching her be taught to look at the picture and guess the word, and pulling out my hair and saying, "That's not reading." And so became very passionate and had to teach her how to read one-on-one. My first language was Spanish, so I was able to teach her the way that we learn reading in Spanish is very based on phonetic awareness. And so I taught her how to read during the pandemic, and then since then have a child who is now in first grade in the same school using curriculum aligned to the science of reading and instructional practices aligned to the science of reading in New York City public schools, and he's reading great. And so as a parent, I know the difference between making this fundamental shift in instruction. And part of the reason that this is still so critical for us to be focusing on and thinking about in New York is that there were recently released NAEP scores that showed that half of Black and Latinx students in New York scored below basic in fourth grade reading, and below basic is the lowest performance level on NAEP. And that shows that students lack even uh, partial mastery of fundamental knowledge in reading. And so we have made some steps towards aligning instruction to the science of reading in New York State. And we are making some progress in what is a monumental shift in how we teach reading in the state. But what we know is that to do this work well takes years of sustained commitment. So with that, I will pass it over to Jeff Smink, our Deputy Director.
Great. Thanks, Arlen. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. So a little over a year ago, we formally launched this campaign. I know many of you were with us in Albany on the Capitol steps. And so for today, we want to share a little bit about the progress that we made last year, with the caveat that, as Arlen shared, there's a lot more that needs to be done if we want to improve reading outcomes across the state. Before I go into the highlights from last year, I do really want to thank and acknowledge all of our campaign partners that have been working on this issue for many, many years. And really, we've really built on that work and are really excited to build on that and thank them, as well as the many legislators that have worked on this issue. So first, let's start on the good news, and then we'll get into the not so good news. So let me see if I'm able to move the slides here. There we go. Let's see. Move the next slide. Perfect. So let's start on the good side. So last year, we had a lot of wins, right? So we had the Back to Basics initiative that the governor introduced in last year's budget, which was the first science of reading focused legislation in the state. It provided $10 million for professional learning. It also required districts to have all their instructional resources aligned with the science of reading by September of this year. We're going to circle back on that one. We also had the path forward, which we'll hear more about in a little bit, which was collaboration between state leaders, which many of you know is not easy, to really transform literacy instruction by embedding the science of reading into teacher preparation programs and certification, which has been a huge challenge for our system. We also had the state education department really step up. They've developed instructional best practices for districts, a curriculum review guide, a series of literacy briefs on the science of reading, as well as webinars and outreach to districts. And I should always preface this that when we started this work, not too many of these folks that I just shared were talking about this issue. So that's where I think we can really highlight what the campaign was able to do as far as building awareness. We also had last year funding for Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, which I know many of you are familiar with, and provides access to evidence-based book distributions or evidence-based books for kids ages 0 to 5. We also had a dyslexia task force and dyslexia-related legislation that was passed. I want to call out many of you on this call, as well as Assemblymember Carroll, who did a lot of work on that. And then finally, we're going to hear a lot more about New York City Reads, which, again, many of you on the call have been involved with. And campaign partners have been supporting implementation across the city of that really, really important initiative. So let's start on the good side. So last year, we had a lot of wins, right? So we had the Back to Basics initiative that the governor introduced in last year's budget, which was the first science of reading focused legislation in the state. It provided $10 million for professional learning. It also required districts to have all their instructional resources aligned with the science of reading by September of this year. We're going to circle back on that one. We also had the path forward, which we'll hear more about in a little bit, which was collaboration between state leaders, which many of you know is not easy, to really transform literacy instruction by embedding the science of reading into teacher preparation programs and certification, which has been a huge challenge for our system. We also had the state education department really step up. They've developed instructional best practices for districts, a curriculum review guide, a series of literacy briefs on the science of reading, as well as webinars and outreach to districts. And I should always preface this that when we started this work, not too many of these folks that I just shared were talking about this issue. So that's where I think we can really highlight what the campaign was able to do as far as building awareness. We also had last year funding for Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, which I know many of you are familiar with, and provides access to evidence-based book distributions or evidence-based books for kids ages 0 to 5. We also had a dyslexia task force and dyslexia-related legislation that was passed. I want to call out many of you on this call, as well as Assemblymember Carroll, who did a lot of work on that. And then finally, we're going to hear a lot more about New York City Reads, which again, many of you on the call have been involved with, and campaign partners have been supporting implementation across the city of that really, really important initiative. So that's the good news, important progress, but you're going to hear the word but a lot today. New York is still way behind most other states when it comes to this issue. As many of you know, most states have been investing in the science of reading and prioritizing it for many years. States such as Mississippi, Louisiana, right? States that we maybe don't think of as leaders in education have actually been prioritizing this issue for many, many years and are outscoring New York when it comes to NAEP outcomes on 4th grade reading. And then if we want to look even closer, we have our neighbors, Massachusetts and Connecticut, have led state-led multi-year comprehensive investments in the science of reading. So that's the model. That's what states have been doing, and they've been starting to get outcomes. New York needs to have a similar effort. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be multi-year. It cannot be a one-year investment. And so that's why we're here today, is to really show that this has to, again, we've got to build on what happened last year. You can go to the next slide. So we're going to really talk today about our budget request for this year's budget, which is being actively debated as we speak. We were really disappointed that there was no funding for K-12 literacy in the governor's budget. We really were hoping that she would build on last year's investment. Unfortunately, she did not. So what we are doing as a campaign is asking the legislature to do a number of things in this year's budget. First is to invest $15 million in science of reading micro-credentials for all K-8 educators. We'll hear more about what those look like in a little bit. But we know that all educators, including middle school teachers, many of them were never trained in the science of reading in their teacher preparation programs. So we know that getting this kind of training is a great way to get folks up to speed and fill in some of the gaps that they never received earlier. The great news is that New York has several excellent micro-credential programs that you'll hear about. And so we're requesting these funds to make sure that all pre-K educators have access to these evidence-based micro-credentials with priority for the ones that are developed here in New York State. The second request is around $10 million for high-need districts to purchase evidence-based instructional resources. So I mentioned that back to basics requirement, right, that all districts have to be aligned with the science of reading by September of this year. We know many are not. And so we really want to prioritize grants to, again, particularly high-need districts and particularly districts that do not have a science of reading aligned curriculum or instructional resources right now. And then finally, we're asking for a $1 million investment to support state ed capacity and literacy that would include implementation of some of the path forward teacher preparation recommendations that we'll talk about, as well as just more support for districts across the state as they make this instructional shift. So I'm now going to transition to our first sort of panel discussion, and I'm really excited about it. So we're going to hear some parent perspectives on this work, right? Sometimes we get a little too focused on the system and not about parents. And we know that all those priorities that I just talked about have a big impact on parents and caregivers. And really, one of the goals of the campaign has been to highlight the important role that parents and caregivers play in early literacy, and also how school districts can empower parents to support their children. So today we have two parents in two districts at opposite ends of the state that have taken two very different approaches to early literacy and family engagement. I think it's a really clear illustration of how the choices districts make um, when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to professional learning, can either empower or limit parents' ability to partner with schools. So I want to welcome Jackie Castillo-Blaber from Niagara Falls City School District and Ebony Matthew from New York City Public Schools. Thanks both of you so much for joining. I know it's a busy time, and I know Ebony is taking a break from her classroom right now. So really appreciate you all making the time to be here. So I'm going to start with you, Jackie. I actually heard your story at an event in Buffalo a few weeks ago, and just really wanted to share it with other folks. So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about you and your daughter's experience with early literacy in Niagara Falls, we'd appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. I'm a parent in Niagara Falls City School District. It's a small city school district, just outside of Buffalo. We're kind of a service desert, so you might as well think of it, our access to a lot of services that kids need, almost like a rural access. We depend very heavily on our regional BOCES, which is Orleans Niagara BOCES. I have a daughter. She's 8 years old. She's in 3rd grade. She's dyslexic. She has dysgraphia. Her experience with early literacy. She's been struggling to read since kindergarten. In kindergarten, she would frequently be sent out of class and sent to go sit with a social worker because she couldn't keep up with letter instruction. There were some pretty clear signs of, dyslexia and dysgraphia that were missed. And she lost instructional time. She was seen as distracted, a distraction, unwilling to complete tasks. In 1st grade, she received 20 weeks of reading recovery as a Tier 3 intervention. This is a balanced literacy intervention. A lot of people might know about it. It's intense. It's balanced literacy, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, one-on-one with a reading recovery teacher. Our BOCES is also a reading recovery training center. So during this intervention, they use leveled text to basically teach her how to read with whole words, and use 3 cueing to read. I look at the picture. Does that make sense? What does the context and things like that. Not a real actual focus on decoding in any way that's like structured and really set up for success. We knew within 5 weeks this wasn't working. The light went out in my kid. She stopped wanting to go to the library. She stopped wanting to read books. I think everybody knows this story, but I requested for it to stop and let's switch to another intervention or have her evaluated. And I was told the protocol is to full 20 weeks, go through a full 20 weeks of this ineffective, harmful reading instruction, which I believe is heavily influenced by the fact we have a training site here. And again, my daughter fell apart. The behaviors got worse. She began to get academic anxiety, falling apart, in classes, crying in hallways, crying in the bathroom, art class, like classes that weren't even reading. I had to pay for an advocate, which a lot of parents in my area cannot afford to do. I had to pay for an advocate to come to an IEP meeting, our initial IEP meeting. I had to identify my daughter and request an evaluation because Child Find did not work for her. And we were able to get approved 3rd-party Orton Gillingham-based intervention for her, which a lot of parents in my district would not even know how to go about doing. So she's able to get this intervention. I have to drive her out to Williamsville, to the next county, Erie County, to obtain this effective intervention after school. So her school day is extended. We usually don't get home till after 5 because of this. 2nd grade, the progress from the intervention is great, but it's slowed because my district has a patchwork curriculum. We have some science of reading, and we have a lot of other practices that are aligned with balanced literacy. It's a struggle. Third grade, which she's in now, third grade is a hostile place for a kid who can't read. Your peers are starting to notice you. You're struggling. Um, your teachers are not a fan of dealing with you at that point. She shuts down a lot, crying in the bathroom. When teachers are not kind, maybe you're snatching a paperback, and that's seen as extremely defiant. I've gotten emails saying she's lazy, she's defiant, she's doing it on purpose. She's heard herself talked about by teachers that she doesn't belong in third grade. She doesn't belong in the building. It's a scary place to be, and it's a dangerous path to be on if you're a kid who's a minority. They're disproportionately receive discipline, you know, especially kids in special education too. And we're a majority minority district. I'd like to get back to the part about us being a service desert. So it's not sustainable for her to continue to receive her only real reading intervention off-site. For us to have to drive into Erie County, it's a lot to put on my family. And I don't think many other families in our district could do this sustainably for the amount of years that a kid with dyslexia needs it. It's not FAPE. It's not a free and appropriate public education. It's outsourcing the public education that she needs. And just to put a human face on this, she has a brother, my son. He's 5 years old. He's high support needs, autistic, non-speaking. I should be focusing on really getting this kid what he needs to be able to speak and be independent. And I can't. I have to make sure she can read because she's going to be a caretaker. And I'm unable to get him additional private speech therapy because that's also out in Williamsville and Erie County. And I have to choose. My husband calls it like, it's like a Sophie's choice, where I have to decide which kid gets the intervention they need. Do I give it to my daughter? She needs to be able to succeed. Or do I give it to my son? Because I can't afford to drive him to his autism school in Amherst, her to her reading intervention in Williamsville, and then him to his private speech in Williamsville every day, all day. I live in Niagara Falls. I should be able to get these things in Niagara Falls or Niagara County. I pay taxes. It's just like the decision I have to make is it could be that my son just never acquires speech, and I think that's unacceptable. So we've spoken at every board meeting and done everything we're supposed to do, textbook, involve parents, to get our district to hear and communicate, you know, the burden that we're placing, because 75% of 3rd to 8th graders in our district are not reading at grade level. And it's a huge problem. And in November 2024, my superintendent and the assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction stated that they plan to certify in September that reading recovery, Fountas and Pinnell, literacy footprints, all balanced literacy instruction aligns with the science of reading.
God.
It's simply not true. Again, this is it is my belief that this is highly influenced by the fact that we have a reading recovery site with training site within our regional BOCES. They do our teacher training. It's not acceptable. We've been prevented from meaningful participation. So when we talk about local control and things, like, does that actually include parents and community? Because we've come out and we've said, this is not okay. There's just so many parents that can't afford to be doing what I'm doing, and I can barely afford to continue to be able to do it. So I hope we can put a commitment behind this and finish the job, because literacy cannot wait for these kids. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for sharing your story. It's incredibly powerful, and unfortunately is happening in other districts across New York. And it's not, you're absolutely right, it's not acceptable, particularly when we have a new law on the books that is supposed to prevent this. So some more to come on that. And I think, again, it just reinforces that curriculum does matter, right? The choices that districts make do matter. And also, again, just reinforces that last year's investment was not enough, right? Not even close. So now we're going to shift over to Ebony with, I think, a little bit more of a positive story of her experience in New York City. And as I mentioned, New York City has had this very ambitious New York City Reads initiative for several years. And Ebony brings sort of two unique perspectives as a parent as well as a teacher in New York City. So Ebony, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about your experience with New York City Reads, and maybe we'll start as a parent, and maybe if you can share a little bit about the Parent Ambassador program that you participated in.
Okay. Hi, good morning. My name is Ebony Matthew. I'm a parent in District 8 in the South Bronx. Like he said, I'm a parent ambassador for New York City Reads, where we had a 10-week program where they taught parents about the science of reading, to give us a understanding of how our children process reading and how they develop becoming fluent readers. It wasn't really in depth, but it was enough so that a parent can help their child better at home, better support their children at home. They gave us great tips on how to make reading fun, where they gave us different games that we can play, during our daily activities, where if we was going to the store, if your child is 3, start with the what letter is this, or looking at the signs, this means stop, this means go. They just helped us further understand how we can help our kids to become fluent readers. In the district that I'm in, we have a lot of bilingual parents, so the language is new to them, so they help them get a better understanding of how to help their child at home, even if it's not in English. They had translators where they translated in their language for them so that they can better understand how to help their child at home also. In the district that I'm in, our students struggle with reading. So with this new initiative, I noticed that most of our students have gone up in reading. As I said, my child, over the summer, I was kind of scared about, that summer slide that most kids do, but I'm happy that because of the different skills that we learned within the Parent Ambassador program, I was able to keep my child reading during the summer. And when he came back in September, he didn't do the summer slide that normally happens. He actually went up a little bit in reading. Also, my kindergartner, she knew going in, she knew all her letters and sounds, and that made it easier for her to transition into kindergarten and have a love for reading. As a teacher, my district is kind of different than other districts because, as I was telling Jeff the other day, my superintendent actually got a group together to unpack our literacy curriculum, which a lot of districts, I'm just finding out, didn't do. So they unpacked our curriculum where each school in our district should be on the same story and on the same lesson from the beginning to the end of the school year. So it made it easier for the teachers to actually go in and teach because they unpacked it to where they let us know what the learning target should be and what the students should get by the end of that lesson. And because they did that, I noticed that even with my own class, that if I had a trouble spot with the lesson, I was able to go to my grade partner and say, hey, did your class get this? What did you do to better help your students? So that because we're on the same page, it makes collaborating with the teachers in your grade much easier. And like I said, my district is like one of the only ones that actually did that, because when I went to town hall and I said it, I had teachers looking at me like, what? They did what? So Yeah, and then we have different professional learnings. We have ongoing professional learnings around the science of reading, where they have different coaches that come in and help us dive more into the science of reading and dive more into how to better help the students become fluent readers. Jacqueline, I'm sorry about your experience. That I was trying not to cry because I really feel, for you and your daughter. But the science of reading, the New York City Reads program that they have here, like I said, last year when we first started it, I noticed that the students kind of struggled. But now, because of the pacing calendars, now because of the more collaborative opportunities that we have across the grades and amongst each other, it's making it so that the students understand things much better. And because we have the support of our superintendent, and she's really heavily in our schools, making sure that our students know exactly what they need to know, that's what makes it easier. And as for a parent, the reason why I did it for the parent side is because I wanted to find out a better way that I can help the parents that I have their students in my class. Not just for my own children, but for my students that I'm teaching. How can I better help their parents to go home when they leave at the end of the day? How can I help them better understand what our curriculum is about? If the teacher and the parents is not, collaborating, and they don't give the teachers the support to help the parents, and how the parents going to help the teachers? It's going to be a never-ending battle. So I just feel like this program helped bridge that gap between the educator and the parent, because now they came in and gave the parents not everything that the teacher knows, but they gave them an overview of what the teacher is doing in the classroom. So it really helps. And pretty much that's it.
Okay, thank you, Ebony, so much for sharing your story. And, I think it's just such an illustration, right, of what a district does, how much it matters, right? Obviously for students, obviously for educators, but also for parents. And so two very different examples. Really, thank you so much for sharing both those really powerful stories. And it was actually Ebony's presentation was a great transition to our next panel, which is going to be focused on what districts are doing. And we actually have New York City with us. So I'm going to kick it over to Arlen to moderate the next part.
Okay, great. So we're gonna talk to New York City Public Schools and Schenectady to learn about what you all are doing to lead the charge in transitioning curriculum and instruction to the science of reading. So I will start with Dan, if we can. Thanks so much for joining us, Dan. We and Lorenda Chisholm from Schenectady Public Schools. So thank you both so much for joining us. I'd love if you both could just start off. I'll start with you, Dan, and then to Lorenda, if you could start off sharing with us what your initiatives are, how you're making this transition to curriculum and instruction aligned to the science of reading, and share with us a little bit the support that you need from the state in order to really launch these initiatives.
Thank you so much for having me, Arlen, and couldn't have had a better segue than hearing from Miss Matthew what the work is like on the ground. Thank you so much, Miss Matthew, for everything you're doing for the community in District 8 in the Bronx. So to give more of the high level very quickly, this is New York City Reads is a strategy that we launched formally 2 years ago, and over 2 years have phased in high quality curriculum based in the science of reading in all of our elementary schools, now all of our early childhood sites. And so I don't think anyone could have said it better than Miss Matthew. The power of having a unified high quality curriculum across, not just across schools, but across entire districts. And so each of our districts had a choice, one of 3 high quality curricula that they could choose from. And they did so. The key to the initiative, Arlen and folks, you also heard this from Miss Matthew, you know, the typical teacher experience when they get a new curriculum is, here it is, maybe we'll give you a, you know, a half-day workshop so you can find out what's in the box. And after that, you're more or less on your own. We wanted to really do something quite different that we've never done in New York City. So we frankly purchased a lot of curriculum-specific coaching and professional development from coaches who really know the specific curriculum that the teachers are charged with delivering. So a school on average will have 22 days of coaching per year. And so, you know, the teachers should see their coach coming in on a regular basis and helping them solve problems. And not to mention the ability for peers to talk to one another, as Miss Matthew talked about, to solve problems. So we are now in 840 plus schools in New York City, touching 350,000 students. That's just in elementary. Again, we also have the same approach in early childhood. We are very proud that we have 1,000 parent ambassadors like Miss Matthew. We need to do more there, but it was really, really important to us to do this in partnership with parents and community. And next year, we plan to expand to middle school because certainly our older learners deserve the same high quality curriculum delivered by educators who have been trained and are getting coaching in the specific curriculum they're responsible for. So very big scope. I think we're off to a good start. Last thing, just very quickly, Arlen, I'll say, you know, we survey the heck out of our educators, our principals and teachers. Ms. Matthew, you probably have seen some surveys. And what we're seeing so far, this could change. We're very aware that this could change. We're seeing 3/4 plus of our educators in the field telling us that the support they're getting to implement the curriculum is effective, is helpful, is allowing them to improve their practice. So good start, way more to do in New York City.
Thanks so much, Dan. Appreciate you sharing that. It's a massive effort that you all are undertaking, and we are excited that you're doing it, and really want to make sure that the state is being supportive of the efforts that you're doing and helping to enhance the work that you're doing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Chisholm from Schenectady City School District. If you could introduce yourself and share a little bit about what you all are doing to make these transitions to the science of reading as well.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Lorenda Chisholm. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning here in Schenectady City Schools. I consider Schenectady like a big little city. I'm originally from Buffalo Public Schools, which is one of the big 5 across New York State. But since my tenure here in the last 3.5 years in Schenectady, we have really been actively working to enhance literacy through the implementation of evidence-based as well as research-based practices that are aligned with the science of reading, pre-K through 12 and beyond. So we're being very intentional about that continuum all the way through. So really it aims to improve the reading proficiencies among our students, and really shifting the narrative for students, families, and our communities. So one of the most significant challenges that we faced here was really that the great number of students who are performing below proficiency level. We are a district that has over 30 different languages spoken. We have a very high transiency rate, even from building to building within the district. And what I found coming here was that there were gaps in instruction because there was no continuum for curriculum here. And so at the time we did vet different curriculum. One, we wanted to make sure that was culturally and linguistically responsive, but we also wanted to make sure that it was aligned to the science of reading. And so the district as a team, we actually decided to go with Wit and Wisdom. So we're in year 3 of Wit and Wisdom as our K through 5 curricular piece for reading and literacy. And with that, what we have seen is that even in the last year, between 22 and 23, we have seen academic gains for our elementary students. It's not where we want to be. We do have work to continue to do, but we, you know, the research says 3 to 5 years, but there is a sense of urgency around literacy and around educating other people's children. And so I don't want people to get comfortable with the incremental gains when we have so much more work to do. But despite that, again, we're trying to make sure that we are aligning our curriculum as well as our curricular resources to this work. We've invested in reimagining what our instructional coaches look like in their roles. And so we do have instructional coaches for about 11 out of the 15 buildings in both math and literacy. We do partner with the Office of Innovation, Equity, and Engagement through Saturday Academies, literacy activities for parents and families. What we know is that some of our parents are functionally illiterate. And so how do we build their capacity around reading? And then how do we help them help their children at home? So we do those partnerships. We actually just hosted our pre-K night last night, where we give out a set of pre-K readiness books for each child as they register for pre-K, because we do know that there is data around books in libraries and home libraries, and the excitement and motivation around reading that is linked to literacy too. And I'm trying to think of what else that we do here. We do a lot. And we're on our incubate stages, even though this is year 3. Again, there is a lot more work to do. We do not do a one and done with our curriculum. I inspect what I expect. So we do learning walks where we're visiting buildings. I'm in buildings. We do our walkthroughs where we're documenting what we're seeing and projecting what additional supports need to happen around those foundational reading skills, specifically in the early literacy pieces. But we are very busy here in Schenectady. We're excited about where we're going. In fact, tomorrow we are presenting on our literacy continuum at our board meeting to provide an update, and not just to the board, but to our community and where we are, what we're doing, and where we are continuing to go. So this remains at the forefront of our work here in teaching and learning in Schenectady schools.
Thank you so much. I think hearing from you both, it really displays the level of this work, that it's not just about curriculum, that there needs to be training and professional learning and parent engagement and district oversight, and that there are many layers to this work, and that it requires a multi-year concerted investment. So I really appreciate you both providing that framing for us. I'd love to, the last question for you both, if you could share what support that you all need from the state in order to sustain this work and build on what you've already laid the groundwork for.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Arlen. I guess I should have introduced myself. Dan Weisberg, First Deputy Chancellor, New York City Public Schools. Great to see you all. We need a lot from the state, and we have some positive examples from around the country, in Louisiana and Tennessee and Mississippi, where there has been a strong commitment at the state level to literacy, and a sustained commitment that spans different administrations. That's been true in all 3 of those states. There are probably others that I know less about, but what happened in those states, I think, needs to happen here in New York. And what is that? One, frankly, is funding, and I'm sure Dr. Chisholm would agree. Even frankly, a relatively small amount of funding. Our budget in New York City is big, but if we got from the state a sustainable funds of even $2, $3, $4 million a year to support the professional learning, to support the curricular materials, that would make a difference. It wouldn't be enough, but it would make a difference. So funding is crucial, and funding also is symbolic. It symbolizes that we are committed to this work over the long term. The other is we frankly need help with our higher ed partners. We spend a tremendous amount of time and effort retraining teachers who either are not familiar with science of reading principles, and to me, more importantly, don't have experience as a student teacher teaching a science of reading based curriculum successfully and getting coached on that. Or worse, they have been kind of indoctrinated in balanced literacy. And so we essentially have to spend a lot of time and effort, we being principals, being mentors, being peer teachers, convincing them that that's not going to work for most of our kids. And they really need a much more deliberate and intentional strategy to help them learn the fundamentals of reading. We have some buying power, so we're trying to use that. And one of the things that is on my list is to come up with a preferred list of ed schools, frankly, because they have really leaned into preparing new teachers in science of reading principles and science of reading based curricula. And obviously a non-preferred list of where we would hire from. But the state has so much more power and influence than we do as an individual district, even a big one. So, I would hope that we see frankly, some coaching and support for higher ed programs that want to change, but also I'm going to be very blunt, some real accountability. It is not going to happen unless there's some level of accountability. It doesn't have to be, we don't want programs shut down. That's not going to help. But I would love to see a scorecard that the state put out that said, here is how this program is doing preparing our new teachers to effectively teach all of our kids to read, to be strong readers. So I'll stop there. I want to leave time for Dr. Chisholm.
Thank you. I think I actually had to snap on the, where our higher ed programs are going. Thinking about this as again, a continuum, short-term and long-term, how do we incentivize teaching again, period, right? So how are higher ed programs funded so that they can provide incentives for people to go into teaching and make it a profession that we all enjoy and love again, right? When we talk about resources, I know we're talking about fiscal, but I'm also thinking about time and human resources, right? Those are things that we don't consider as capital in this work. And how do we build spaces and allot time for the training to take place, for teachers to, so districts can pay teachers over the summer or what have you, to participate in any training and ongoing training, not just the one and done type of training. I would love to see post-secondary institutions, unfortunately with a lot of closure, but I think every teaching program needs to teach literacy as a foundation. We are all teachers of literacy and we are all teachers of reading, whether you teach social studies or math or art. I don't care what your content area subject is. We all teach reading and literacy. It's how we provide access to the curriculum for our students. And then I think, I'm micro-credentialed, but still making sure that we're affording those opportunities. And what does it not just look like for teachers, but for leaders who need to go in to observe that those things are happening. And that's another layer of accountability. So I would love to see those things and even what other additional resources out there are for parents, that programming that can take place, full programming for parents.
Thank you both so much. It's great to hear directly from you all on the ground, making these changes and making these transitions and understanding what the state can do to support and understanding the whole system, that it's not just about the schools and the classrooms, but it's also about the higher education community and how we're training and preparing teachers to go into classrooms. So I really appreciate you sharing those perspectives, and we look forward to continuing to highlight your work and figuring out how we as a campaign, we as a community, and we as a state can support the work that you're doing. So with that, we'll transition now to our next panel that Jen O'Connor, our Director of Partnerships and Early Childhood Policy, is going to lead with some of our campaign partners to talk about our campaign priorities and our asks in this year's budget.
Thanks, Arlen. So the campaign is made up of over 100 partners across the state, and we're fortunate to be able to leverage their expertise on a wide variety of issues ranging from early childhood to teacher prep. Today, we're going to hear from 3 leaders pretty quickly about their work on the campaign's budget priorities of professional learning and teacher prep, and how state investment could help them to reach more educators and students across New York State. So we're joined by Dr. Katie Pace Miles. She's an associate professor at Brooklyn College and president of the Reading Institute. Sarah Holbrook, who's a fellow at the Science of Reading Center at SUNY New Paltz, and Emily Hellstrom, director of external affairs and strategy at the Literacy Academy Collective. We're going to start with Katie and Sarah. If you could please tell us a little bit about the micro-credentials that you offer, how they're currently being used, and how additional state funding could help you to reach more educators across the state.
Thank you, Jen. And that was such a wonderful segue from Dr. Chisholm and Dan Weisberg at NYCPS. So as Jen mentioned, I'm a professor at Brooklyn College. I have an advanced certificate in reading science that's all online. So Dr. Chisholm, I'm thinking of your literacy leaders. I require all of my students to complete 2 substantial structured literacy clinical experiences, tutoring children in New York City public schools, and I have a 3rd clinical experience in structured writing. And through my work as a university professor, I've realized, well, you need coursework, you need advanced coursework, and then you also have to back up and you need preliminary coursework too. And that's where I worked with a nonprofit that I founded called the Reading Institute, so I could share my resources more widely in partnership with Brooklyn College, where I'm a professor, and New York City Public Schools. We created a 10-hour micro-credential. And the micro-credential is a combination of academic content, interactive visuals, and filming in New York City public schools. And right now we have a grant through Brooklyn College so that 2,000 New York City public school teachers will complete this micro-credential by the end of this school year. And the Reading Institute has an additional 2,000 licenses to share with teachers across both in New York City and across New York State right now for free. And we're also partnering with professors. So I've given the micro-credential to 13 professors, both in New York City and across the state, to use it in their coursework as they see fit, because we need to retrain a lot of professors, and a lot of these professors aren't yet that knowledgeable about the science of reading, so we need to help them out. Additionally, a district, Jamesville Dewitt, near Syracuse, is doing a full district implementation using this micro. And just obviously, as Dan said, like, and Dr. Chisholm, we need more funding, right? It costs money to run these micro-credentials, licenses in the learning management system. And so we just need to cover the cost of being able to share this knowledge as widely as possible. Choosing a curriculum is one thing. It's absolutely vital to have an evidence-based curriculum, but teachers need to understand why a curriculum is designed a certain way and how it aligns to research to support the development of literacy, so they are inoculated really from going back to balanced literacy practices. We can't go backwards.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Holbrook. I'm from SUNY New Paltz. I'm also the Director of Humanities at Kingston City School District in upstate New York. So our micro-credential from SUNY New Paltz is a 35-hour self-paced asynchronous micro-credential, and it's based on the 5 pillars of effective reading instruction. So it follows there's 5 modules, each one based in the 5 pillars of effective reading instruction. And it was designed in a way that the main focus for us was to that if a teacher was taking it, that they would be able to apply something tomorrow. Like, what's something I can do tomorrow? Something tangible that's not like overwhelming for them, but very applicable to what they're doing in work that will help drive their instruction forward. It also comes with an administrator guide as well that gives a brief overview of what the micro-credential is, and what they should look for in the classroom, what it shouldn't look like in the classroom, and questions to ask their teachers when they're talking about like their observations or walkthroughs. So one of the ways that we're seeing school districts utilize the micro-credential is through like a cohort model, where school districts are organizing their teachers. That's what we're doing here in Kingston, into like a cohort of teachers, and they move through it together, taking the asynchronous either together or doing it outside of the school day, and then coming together for like synchronous pieces to talk about each module and, you know, what you've tried in your classroom, what has worked and what hasn't worked. In terms of what we can, you know, use for the state, obviously funding. I mean, money is going to be key in all of this. Money for the schools too, because like I kind of wear both hats. So just thinking about like my district too, just like being able to, sub the teachers out in order to continue their professional learning is like, that's a huge burden for school districts right now to have to bear this, this cost. And what's the other thing I wanted to say? Funding and I also think that the state should be a little bit more deliberate in what they're saying is the science of reading. I've sat on a lot of these meetings with the state, and they're very adamant about the fact that they're not saying you can't do this and you have to do that. And I understand somewhat the rationale behind that, but a lot of educators and a lot of school administrators aren't reading people. And without that guidance from the state, I don't know that districts are going to make the best choices, because the science of reading is a really hot topic right now and everybody's rebranding themselves that way. And if you are not educated in reading very heavily, it's going to be very easy to be fooled by certain people or certain companies or certain things. And that's what I'm very fearful of. Like I always say, like, I'm not worried about my district because I've got my district, but what about all the other districts in the state who don't have people who have a lot of reading knowledge driving this forward? And I think that's where partnerships with colleges also too, but then that's tricky too about, but like making sure, like you're partnering with people who are credible in what they're producing. I was a teacher for 16 years and I've worked with plenty of consultants who were balanced literacy consultants who are now rebranding themselves in this like new science of reading way. And we all know a leopard doesn't change its spots. So I wish the state would be a little bit more clear on what it's looking for, so districts have something to follow. I mean, I looked at that check sheet we have to fill out by September, and we could have filled that out when, honestly, we could have filled it out 2 years ago when we were doing literacy footprints and been okay. So in absence of that, I'm fearful as what may happen. And then, all of a sudden it's going to be like, oh, this isn't effective. So, but yeah, thank you. Oh, and there's a QR code on the slides for enrollment into the micro-credential.
Thank you both for that information and for your candid perspectives. I think we agree with you there. I'm going to turn over to you, Emily, at this point. Emily, your organization facilitated the Path Forward, which is an important collaboration between state leaders to transform literacy instruction by embedding the science of reading into educator prep programs and certification. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and about how state funding could support some of the key recommendations included in the Path Forward report?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to talk today. I just want to ground this in the fact that Literacy Academy Collective opened the first in-district public school in the country that is specifically designed for students with dyslexia, language-based learning disabilities, and other struggling readers. We're in the South Bronx, teaching the most struggling readers in one of the most marginalized neighborhoods. And our students are experiencing academic success, and sometimes for the first time in their entire school career. And that is because we are training our teachers in the evidence-based practices grounded in the science of reading. And one of our biggest challenges, and the reason that we started and joined the Path Forward, is because we found that so many teachers did not know what this is. And we had to spend an inordinate amount of time really doing deep training in order to be able to have them reach our readers. I will say this is like a dual solve. When teachers have these evidence-based practices that they feel empowered to use, they feel highly effective. And what Dr. Chisholm was talking about, like, let's, bring back the joy of teaching. There is nothing more joyful than the connection that is made between a student and teacher when they are teaching that child to read, and when that child is experiencing academic success, the first pillar of culturally responsive and sustaining education. So we ground this in really the most significant civil rights issue in New York State, and we joined the Path Forward. You can just take it to the next slide. Just to give you guys some perspective, New York State ranks 5th from the bottom in the integration of scientifically based reading instruction in our educator prep programs. I don't think anyone wants to be the fifth in the bottom. Definitely not New York State. I think we pretty much pride ourselves on being number one in everything. If you just go to the next slide, I know Dan, first Deputy Chancellor Weisberg talked about these other states. I just want to like really point out that in 1 decade, Mississippi went from 49th in the country to 9th in the country in their reading scores. This is very specific. It also applies specifically to African-American students, Black students, brown students. In that decade, African-American students, fourth graders, are now number 3 amongst their peers nationally, and Hispanic students are number 1 and number 2 for math. Like these are real numbers. And that is in a state where 28% of children under 18 live in poverty. So this is absolutely doable. The way that they did this is through the path forward. Basically, they took a hard look at their teacher preparation programs, how they were preparing teachers. So it's really what Sarah Holbrook and Katie Pace-Miles are talking about. We must train our teachers differently. So we really joined the path forward. If you go to the next slide, this is a statewide policy initiative that really looks at one of the levers, which is higher ed preparation programs, and sees like, how can we make change in this area? It brings together leaders across the state, CUNY, SUNY, the governor's office, NYSED, the state legislator, CICU, our private institutions, and NYCPS. The leaders came together over a full year to create a state action plan. That plan has been launched. The big thing that we need is a commitment and a dedication to fund and support that state action plan. If you go to the next slide, I won't go into great detail on the action plan, but I will say, you know, the top 2 areas in the action plan are really NYSED putting this into place and talking about some of the carrots and sticks and real accountability that can come from, you know, our state education institution saying we must do this. In order to do that, they have to review programs. We have over 4,500 educator prep programs in the state. That's in 86 different institutions. That is an enormous amount of review. We need $500,000 to $1 million in order to fund NYSED staff to be able to do these reviews. We cannot know what's in these programs unless we actually take a look, and that takes people and power. We must do this. Otherwise, we will not get the results that we have in Mississippi and Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, Massachusetts. So people are doing this. We need to do it too, and we can. We know how to do this. We're also doing some pilot programs with specific educator preparation programs across the state. 9 to 12 universities have signed up and said, "Hey, I want to take a good hard look at what's in my program and make some serious changes." Highlight the bright spots, but also do the deep, hard work of making change. Change is hard, but we have to do it. So yeah, we hope that the state legislator will support us in the budget this year so that we can actually create a culture of science of reading in our state, across our state, so that, you know, people like Dr. Pace-Miles, Sarah Holbrook, SUNY New Paltz, Brooklyn College are really become the gold standard, but that we have these universities across our state doing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. I will share that in addition to that 500,000 that you have in your budget ask, the campaign is asking for an additional 500,000 to boost NYCPS capacity. And like everyone has said, while the state ed guidance is helpful, it's still optional, and districts need more support and accountability in order for the state to make this shift. So thank you all. I'm going to turn this back over to Jeff to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Thank you all so much for our speakers for joining, just sharing some really, really powerful stories. I think, again, about what's possible, right? Because sometimes we get a little too focused on what's the bad stuff, but I think we heard some really powerful stories as well as why we need to do this, right? Thinking about Jackie's story, like this is why we're here. This is why we need to do better. So again, thank you all so much. We're over time. We will follow up with the recording and some background materials, as well as more information on how to advocate for this work. I also put a plug in, if you're not a member of the campaign, I'll put a link in the follow-up to make sure that you're joined with us. And again, thank you all so much, and we will be in touch.